Good evening all, and welcome. A first responder's job is never easy. And, of course, the nice and easy cases have not been covered in tonight's video. No. We're looking at some dark, dangerous, and horrific stuff. Proceed with caution. I honestly nearly teared up reading one of these stories. And, for the record, that's the first time that's ever happened. So, tread carefully, as you'll probably get the feels by the end of it. Always wear your seatbelt, guys. If you don't know that now, you'll know it by the end. Get comfortable. Get some tissues for the tears, and let the darkness take control. I used to be a first responder in my town, and responded to one of the worst one-car accidents my town has ever seen. My town is very peaceful, but that does not stop unpeaceful people from coming through, and sometimes causing an accident. Early one morning, we got a call for a single car accident on a road that people drive too fast on, far too often. It's sort of a main road. It's a main route, but rarely had lots of traffic, and it's a pretty heavily wooded area. In my area, roads going through woods usually means that road is super curvy. The driver was probably taking a turn too fast, didn't turn in time for the next one coming up, and hit a slope that turned his car over. That's what I thought before I saw the car. This thing was mangled. I had no idea a car could get so banged up all on its own. There was glass everywhere. Car juice, as I called it, sprayed around. I could definitely see where the car hit, but also looks like it ran into a lot of tree before setting where it is. We passed a tree that had damage just as we were pulling up to the accident. So, somehow, this guy not only hit a tree on a turn, but also continued to roll/tumble up the road and then upside down in the other lane facing the wrong direction. It was maybe 10 to 20 yards away from the first tree that we assumed he hit. When we arrived, there was another truck from the department on the scene, the rescue truck, and the jaws of life were already at work trying to pry this kid out. The EMS had stretchers standing by, but he needed to be airlifted to the hospital. Me and another firefighter went to a very conveniently located field to place markers for the Lifestar helicopter. They came within a few minutes, but were nervous to land in the area because it was very small. While the lieutenant was helping the Lifestar, I was beckoned to help the victim. This guy had no face. He was totally unrecognizable. He was covered in blood, swollen, cut up, chunks of skin missing, a mangled arm and leg. One of the firefighters I was with was looking really upset and confused. She looked like she was holding back tears, then looked angry, then looked determined, and would go through those phases in turn, and not always in that order. Usually I would ask, "Hey, what's wrong?" But not entirely appropriate when you're rescuing some kid who'll probably pass away in the helicopter. Turns out she was able to recognize the car, but wasn't able to recognize her friend. She was one of the first on the scene and was playing a primary role of getting him out, before the thought occurred that she might know him. After he was freed from the car and moved to the stretcher to be treated, she did recognize him. I could see it on her face. She, somehow, amazingly kept her cool. The EMTs cleaned up the kid's face and were getting ready to do any patchwork they could. The cleaner his face got, the easier it would be to identify him. I watched her face turn from her determined, "this is my job" look, slowly into a look of horror and anger, the "I don't want to be here right now" face. Her face squished up like she just ate a lemon. It looked like she was trying to keep all her tears and cries from escaping, then immediately went back to, "This is my job." By the time the Lifestar landed in the field, we had the kid strapped in and ready to go, and a little patched. We all hauled him up the tiny little tree-lined slope to get to the field, and he was loaded into the helicopter and left for the hospital. Then she lost it. She fell to the ground like her legs didn't work and screamed and sobbed. Only one of the guys knew exactly what was going on, but he didn't say anything. Another firefighter who was closer to her sat with her arm around her for comfort. But it didn't stop her wailing sobs and her talking helplessly to herself. Things like, "Why did it have to be him?" and "Goddamn, what an idiot," and blaming herself. Later in the week, we had a discussion about the accident and what was determined exactly to have caused it, the kid's status, and our review of how we handled it. That's also when we found out why she was so heartbroken about the kid. She stood in front of everybody and told us that he was a very close friend of hers from school, and she didn't even think about it being someone she knew until they started pulling him out of the car. She said she told herself it's no one she knew and to keep herself calm, but she definitely recognized him by the time the helicopter was ready to take him. She said she was pretty much holding her breath the entire time up until the copter came to keep herself from crying, and when he was gone could she finally let it out. She knew he might not make it, which was the most upsetting thing for her. The fact that she was directly involved in saving his life would weigh heavily as well, and no doubt she'd place blame on herself if he died. They determined the cause of the accident was him taking a turn too fast, slid sideways and hit the tree with the back fender of his car, which sent it spinning in the road, and, in the turn, hit the slight slope that was just steep enough to get his car to roll over a few times back onto the road. Our overall review was okay. Everything about the accident was handled as it should be. Sand was put down to absorb car juices. We cut the car open properly, moved all the large chunks out of the road so what little traffic came by could get past, and they handled the kid just fine too. Everything was done as correctly as it could be for what had happened, but the guy ended up passing anyway. He was the same age as the girl firefighter who helped rescue him, so 21 at the time. That's probably the worst single car accident I have ever seen. My town is small, very hilly and very swervy. It's easy to go way too fast on the roads here, especially if you don't live here and don't know all the turns, and when to slow down. It was predicted the kid was going over 80, which is insanely fast for the road he was on. When I heard that, I was surprised he didn't literally fly off the road and into the woods, and that any tree would have stopped him enough to just spin a few times. I couldn't believe it. 80 miles per hour. My car shakes off if I try to go that fast on a highway. It suddenly made all the damage to the car make sense. But anyway, there you go. Probably the worst non-fire related call I've ever been on. I should also mention this is the first heavy call I went on as a firefighter. Most things before this were burnt toast at the old folks' home, or being called to assist a town with a fire that they've already got under control. If it isn't obvious from this story, please drive safely. Remember, it's far better to be 1 minute late somewhere than your family to have to sit through a minute of silence. I'm sharing this because I have to get it off my chest, and I just drunk enough to not care about what my former bosses would say about me disclosing incident reports or anything remotely similar. I suppose an introduction is in order. My name is Randy Hamilton. I've been an EMT for almost a decade. Well, I guess it would be more accurate to say I was an EMT. Me and my former employers had what you would call a conflict of interest, and I turned in my resignation about 3 days ago. Really, it was just a formality. They would have fired me if I hadn't. For the past 30-odd years, I've lived in the little town of McDermott, Ohio. Beautiful little slice of Appalachia. As long as you can overlook the fact that it's located in the heart of the heroin epidemic sweeping the Midwest. Hell, Scioto County was leading the state in heroin OD cases last time I checked. And from my time in the department, I can verify that statement. So you're probably wondering what got me so eaten up that I had to down a half bottle of whiskey to open up about it. Well, pull up a seat and get comfortable, because you're going to be here a while. I joined the department in 2007, fresh out of school, and went through courses to get certified as an RN. But then I realized working in an office really wasn't my style. Turns out stabilizing trauma victims in the back of a speeding vehicle was. I had to take a couple of more classes, but they were cake compared to what I'd already done, and I was pretty sure I had found my calling. Pretty sure is the key word there. You never forget your first run. The feeling's comparable to when you lose your virginity, except it's typically not as pleasant of an experience. Mine? Car wreck. 18-wheeler hit a red 2005 Chevy Cobalt. Well, nicked it more like. Semi was absolutely fine, barely a scratch on it. The Chevy? Not so much. Girl behind the wheel swerved and hit the guardrail. Flipped the car too. We got there about 3 minutes after the call went out, and we, being me and my partner for that shift, Michael. Mike was and still is a great guy. A little morbid at times, but in our line of work, you just pick that up. He'd been on for 4 years before I joined, and had some pretty messed up stories of his own. As we were making our way to what was left of the Cobalt, I saw something that turned my blood to ice. Laying off on the side of the road, about 50 feet out from where the Cobalt came to rest, was the driver. Even from so far away, I could tell she wasn't going to make it. Her lower jaw was an absolute mangled wreck, and I could see the white glint of bone sticking out of her forearm. Compound fracture for sure. Jesus Christ, I said, absolutely shocked at what I was seeing. How the hell did she? That's why you wear a seatbelt, rookie. Last thing you want to do is go face first through a windshield doing 60. Mike's words hit even harder when we got closer and saw that this girl was still alive. I doubt any of you have any idea of what sort of horrific sounds came out of the mouth of a human being who has what basically amounts to little more than minced hamburger meat for a jaw. Pained, wet gurgling, mixed with involuntary exhalation, not so dissimilar from an asthmatic wheeze. That's what I heard that came out of her mouth. Within seconds, we had her on a stretcher, going with another ambulance. Sometimes I like to think she made a miraculous recovery, and I just haven't got the memo. I'm not that stupid though. With injuries like that, she'd had to have been fed through a straw for the rest of her short and agonizing life. That wasn't what got me that night. What did get me was when we checked out the Cobalt proper. There was a massive streak of blood mixed with bits of brain matter and skull fragments, which started where the car had flipped on its side and ended at the rear left of the passenger window. Almost immediately, I thought the worst and took a closer look. That's when I heard the crying. Turns out the girl driving was a babysitter, and she had 2 little girls in the back seat and only 1 open seat. Irresponsible jackass had stacked the kids on top of each other and had them sharing a seatbelt. A reckless driver, improperly secured children, and an open window. Recipe for disaster. We had to cut in through the roof of the car to get the girls, and when I looked through that hole, something in me died. The surviving girl had her sister's decapitated corpse laying on her lap and was holding onto the body like her life depended on it. When she looked up at me through the hole, with a level of sorrow no girl her age should be able to comprehend, let alone experience, I broke. I pulled her out of that wreck and hugged her with tears in my eyes and told her it was all going to be okay, that we were going to get her home as soon as we got her checked out. While I carried her to the ambulance, Mike was confirming that the other child was dead. That's when the girl in my arms said something that still haunts me to this very day. "Why are you leaving Veronica? Why are you leaving my sister? She's hurt. Please, can't you help her, mister?" I still have nightmares to this day about that night, about that little girl and her sister, and I just don't know how much longer I can deal with it. That's enough for tonight. The whiskey's wearing off. I don't feel like going back to that night any more than I have to. Veronica and Abigail. Those were their names. I'm sorry I couldn't help her, Abby. I'm so sorry. This happened in 1999, Western Australia. I stood as a 19-year-old who was an active volunteer firefighter. I was still working in the town I grew up in, being in rural Western Australia, and I had varied success as an athlete at a state level, but my passion was my involvement in the local volunteer fire and rescue service. I was only 16 when I joined the active ranks after spending the years prior as a junior in their running team, which was a pretty full-on sport. I enjoyed all things firefighting, rescue and emergency and response, and had to have a real calling for it. But as I mentioned above, I did have quite a large sporting influence in my life too. I travelled to a nearby town for a field hockey game, and while there, I caught up with an old mate, Wayne, that I was in the state hockey squad with, and we were really close during that time. A few years back, we both left the state hockey scene and gained employment. We ended up being only about 80 kilometers from each other, but had not realized it until today. After the game, Wade and I naturally gravitated towards each other, and spent the rest of the night at the bar just spending time together and catching up on old times, and really enjoying each other's company. Fast forward to midnight, and the bar was closing up, as it does. We were parked pretty close together by chance, with both our intentions, even though driving whilst being inebriated, to go back to our respective homes. Mine being about 80 kilometers away on an unsealed road, but a pretty straight route, with Wayne going to drive to his home, which was about 175 kilometers away, by taking the standard bypass past my town and then cutting back down a long section of highway on the other side leading to his home, which was a farm. I wish I had a story now of how we had a realization that driving after so much drink was definitely not the best idea after drinking so many beers. But hey, I was about to do the exact same thing, so I didn't feel that I could say anything to this guy, and it was pretty common back then. But please, in no way do I condone or defend it. Don't ever do it. So we leaned on the boot of his red Commodore and talked and laughed as we finished the rest of our last beer. And I remember spending a lot of that time giving him slack about his personalized number plate he had on his car that said Crafty, which was an old nickname because he was quite good at his hockey ball handling skills, which caught many good players by surprise, hence the nickname. With promises of catching up again soon, we both parted ways, and I returned home dodging the rural town cop gauntlet and getting home with no problems a little before 1:30 a.m. I showered and got into bed, and then my phone rang for only a second and then it stopped, which showed a missed call from Wayne. So naturally I thought he may have ended up in my town and wanted to party on. So I tried to call back, but it rang 3 or 4 times before I gave up and went to sleep. I woke up again to the sound of 5 or 6 text messages, one after another, like when you turn your phone back on right after a flight. It was about 2:30 a.m, and they were all from Wayne, but all of them were gibberish and pretty much consisted of random letters and other gibberish. So I tried to call again a few times and messaged him, letting him know that if he were around, he could come and crash at my place. If I needed, I could get the missus up out of bed to collect him, even though we would both be dead for doing so. Again, I got nothing back. It was at 2:19 a.m. that my fire brigade pager sounded, with notification that there was a motor vehicle accident on the bypass to the south of the town, location unknown, but that it was about 2/3 of the distance from the main bypass, and that there was a telecommunications van with a yellow flashing light on site, as he was the one who called it in. I was a little under the weather, so I declined to attend on the first call, but after they sounded the brigade's siren repeatedly and set off the pagers again, it was obvious that not an adequate crew had turned out to the station to attend, so I got dressed and got the missus to take me there, which was only a few minutes away. When I arrived, I was the officer in charge, being third in command, with no one higher there, as there were only 4 firefighters, but 5 with me included. So I tasked the group and explained that while I had a few beers earlier, that I would not have turned up if I were unable to perform, and while I would not be driving any appliances, I was comfortable to be OIC, and if anyone had a problem with that, then speak up and I would gladly relinquish command and leave. As I said, we were only 4 guys, and to be honest, none of us had any real idea what was going on, with the longest serving being about 18 months in and only just finished his induction to firefighting a few months ago. I digress and apologize. So with myself in the passenger seat and 2 others in the main pump and the other 2 out in front, we made our way to the incident, which was expected to be about 40 minutes away. We intersected and began down the bypass after about 20 minutes, and by now the cold air had snorted me out. I expected to come across not much, perhaps a car rolled over, or not so much damage due to the non-emergency of the call, and the fact that operations had not updated us since turnout. I saw the yellow flashing light long before we made it to the incident, and upon arrival everything changed. It was obvious from the marks on the road leading up to the car that it lost control, and ploughed through a stock fence, and beyond that, there were huge gouges to the paddock with red paint up the side of a small walled dam that I could not see into, but had a guy in a reflective vest on the top of the bank waving a torch. I got out and tasked the 4 others, and then, as part of my 360-degree appraisal, I walked up the bank and met with an old mate in a vest. The guy in the vest was quite frantic and speaking a mile a minute, with huge hand gestures, with his torch flapping about that periodically illuminated a license plate that was partially submerged, but upside down because the car was on its roof, in the middle of the small dam, with only the back wheels, exhaust pipe and license plate visible. "That license plate," said Crafty. "As a first responder, I believe that you activate a certain mode in times of emergency, and your training and natural abilities come to the front, and as such you perform exceptionally well, and it is only later in the shower or at dinner or another time when the past decides to visit you and you're human." Well, I became human right there. I knew it had been at least 2 hours since that car had landed in the dam, because there was frost already over the marks that Wayne's car had made going into the dam. I did walk the perimeter of the dam, looking to see if Wayne had been ejected, but found nothing. I then returned my focus to the almost completely submerged car, and remember clearly saying, "Oh, mate," in the saddest I have ever heard my own voice. A tow truck arrived about the same time, and he indicated he could hitch it onto the skull, dragging it out, and then sort it out on the paddock, but I really felt that was unacceptable. I was a swimming pool manager at the time, and as such a lifeguard, so I felt it best to go in and collect my friend with dignity before the car was recovered. So at about 4 a.m, in the middle of winter, being about 6 degrees Celsius, I stripped down to my underwear and waded in the dam and made my way to the sunken car that I really hoped did not have my friend in it, and perhaps it was at least a car thief or something like that. I had an intrinsically safe torch that I remembered being waterproof due to its design in my right hand, with the lanyard tied around my waist, and I steadied myself with my left hand on the car's chassis and took 8 deep controlled breaths and dove under to where I assumed the driver door was. I had a really hard time locating anything, as just the fact that the car was upside down really throws your perception of where things are, like door handles and such, and the driver's window was still intact, which was not fantastic. I came up for air, and then went again, and was able to find the door handle and get the door open, which was lucky considering I thought the mud would stop it. I put my back to the pillar and used my legs to open the door as much as I could, which was actually quite a long way. I then went back up for air and had to give myself a few minutes to get my breathing sorted as it was so cold. I ducked back down again, and I had to literally hold my torch to the temple of my head so I could only see perhaps 15 or 20 centimeters in front of me, and I entered the driver door. I cannot instill the absolute horror and panic that a man feels when 15 centimeters from his face, a white, dead face of a friend appears, with eyes slightly open and a mouth that was deformed from a broken jaw. I reacted by jumping out of my skin, and I hit my head really hard on the roof. It was just then I felt an absolute calmness, and I knew it was just a task, and that somehow I felt Wayne calling me a chicken for flinching. I felt and put my left arm over his dangling arms, and tried to locate his seatbelt, as he was still strapped in upside down, and I was having some major difficulties locating it in the dark. I went back up to the surface and had to catch my breath, and upon my return I continued searching for the buckle, and when I finally found it, I could not release the seatbelt. It didn't matter how much I pushed the button, or how much I pulled on it, it wouldn't release. I was running short on air, but did not want to go up to get air because I knew I might have difficulty locating the seatbelt buckle again, and I thought that it was so close that only 1 or 2 more seconds and it would come free. While my prayers were finally answered, I got the buckle to release, to which I tried to return to the surface to get air, and then returned for the body. However, when I tried to push back and out the car door to the surface, I felt my right wrist snag on something in the car. While I tried to just break the lanyard, it was too strong, and my frantic tugging only made the torch flap about, illuminating sections of a dashboard and Wayne's upper legs and bare stomach, which made me freak out even more. I was already short on air, and now I was doing that gulping action that everyone has done when they hold their breath a little too long, and was getting really scared. It was then that I just stopped, not because of anything profound or an incident. I just really stopped and did nothing. It felt as though I wasn't gasping or dying for air anymore, and I calmly thought to direct the torch to whatever was snagging to calmly free it and let myself go. When I grabbed the torch, I pointed it at my wrist with my left hand and saw that my lanyard had become stuck around the unclasped buckle of the seatbelt that I had undone. I knew exactly where the issue was, and I tried to unloosen it from the buckle, and I really couldn't do it. It was like a warmth coming over me for a few seconds, the fear returning to me, that I was still trapped. It was then that time stood still, and with the untamed torch flapping about, because I was still concentrating on the snag, that I just stopped as the torch illuminated Wayne's face, and he was just looking right into my soul, with normal open eyes and a slight smile on his face. It's as if Wayne said, "It's okay, you're a useless mug, because you don't have to worry about it, and I've got your back. Let me sort it out and get you out of trouble as usual." It was then that Wayne's hand moved purposefully and unhooked the court lanyard, and just for lack of a better word, left. After surfacing and coughing while regaining my lungs, I looked to the damn bank, and the other firefighters were screaming and pointing. One of them was right there in the water with me in such a frantic state. After I collected Wayne and took him to the dam bank, I put him in an ambulance, and I started to resolve the scene and talk to the guys, and I was made aware of their side of the story. While I had gone under and surfaced a few times, I apparently went under, and as time went by, the guys got increasingly worried when I did not resurface. I explained about my lanyard getting stuck, and that I had to get it free, but I left out my experience with Wayne. However, the guys would not let it go. Apparently I was underwater for over 15 minutes, and after only around 1 minute, one of the guys stripped off and dove in with me. He tells me to this day that he got hold of my legs, and with both feet on the car could not budge me. He even explained that he dove down many times to feel and see where I was trapped to free me, but could never find anything holding me there, and he swears he ran his fingers down both my arms, seeing as they were the two things he thought that could be caught. I woke up every morning at 2:19 a.m. for months after that, until Wayne visited me again and told me that it was not my fault and to forgive myself. I've never woken up at 2:19 a.m. again. Every day, I miss my friend. I love you, Wayne. I worked on a mine in Australia, on the west coast, back in 2009. The Mine Emergency Response Term, ERT, was called to an incident being some fishermen washed off a popular fishing rock nearby called Garth's Rock. Luckily we had a ship in port, and as such had 3 tugboats in the vicinity, and they were able to respond to the people in the water before our arrival at the port, which is about a 20-minute drive from the main site. We arrived and needed to reverse the ambulance about 150 meters down the jetty, as it was only 1 lane, and to leave without having to back up was a bit of a priority. Myself, as the officer in charge, and 3 other medics grabbed our first response gear and some extra thermal blankets, then made our way down to a lower boat landing and were given flotation devices before we were allowed to board the tug, and after doing so, we were ushered to the port side gallery door, where inside 3 casualties were resting after being pulled from the ocean after about 2 hours of floating around. Due to the tight confines of the galley, the 2 tug workers that were inside doing their best to look after them had to leave to accommodate my team, and they both left out the starboard gallery door and remained outside, as did 3 to 4 other tug workers on the port side, with a few others on other parts of the boat. When we entered, it took a while to adjust to the light. There were 2 tables on my right up against the wall that has a bench seat on either side that you have to slide into with a table in the middle, which is all bolted in place. In front of these two booths was a small gap that you could use to walk the length of the room, and either enter one of the seats or leave by the port or starboard doors. I assessed that there were 3 people in the room. 2 of them were on the ground, one immediately in front of me laying on his side, and the other on his back halfway down the gap, where you walk, and both were middle-aged men, with many obvious cuts and scrapes from attempting to climb rocks back up the reef and get to land unsuccessfully. The third casualty, however, was an older man who was sitting at the far gallery table with his hands clasped in front of him, elbows on the table and a 1,000-yard stare, even though looking at him he had as many clear injuries such as cuts and so forth, with most obviously needing further care, such as stitches, and a lot of blood had oozed out and congealed over the table, with his hands just clasped together with his elbows on the table. I directed the other medics, as appropriate, during my triage, being one to each of the prone casualties, and myself and another medic attended to old mate just sitting there. We were made aware by one of the other medics dealing with one of the other guys on the floor that this was his dad, and he was earlier very upset that he had entered the water after his mate was washed in, and apparently he kept on going on and repeated the same thing over and over, about having to bloody save his son, and only went quiet a few minutes before our arrival. After several attempts, the old mate showed no understanding or interest in communication with myself or my partner, so between us we just decided that shock and or hypothermia were probably a factor, and attempted to first put a thermal blanket on him, while at the same time I would try to take some primary vitals and see if there was any obvious life-threatening bleeding above or under the table. Then it went pear-shaped. This guy looked my other medic in the eyes and said, "You can't resolve this. You are just occupying my presence. You need to let me keep going." I looked at my partner the same way we have many times before we have come across a hysterical or incoherent casualty. But this bloke was so calm and unwavering, with interlaced fingers and a deadpan voice, that we just stared at each other, waiting for the other to take charge, which is quite common in these circumstances. After a few seconds, I found composure and informed him that he had encountered a spot of mischief, and we needed to assess and fix his wounds, and that soon we would be at the hospital, and all would be progressing from there, and that he could relax. Well, the old mate, quick as a wicket, stood upright, and the table broke free of its base and hit me pretty hard on the right leg. Now, I don't mean the table was rotten or crappy, it was just poorly fastened to the floor. I mean, the tabletop made an audible splinter from where I saw him standing up, with the force concentrated on his 2 front thighs, and actually broke it loose, pushing it into me and against the back of the seat. My medic mate, being so crammed in a tight area of the gallery, later told me that he put out his left hand to the casualty and his right hand to the tabletop to grab it and stabilize it. The old mate was very quick and pushed past my mate medic and went out the starboard galley door like the wind. I pushed the table forward on the bench top, and both myself and mate medic followed, probably only your second or 2 behind. But a search of the deck and a run up the stairs proved nothing in finding him, and no one outside the gallery saw anything except myself and my partner. There are stairs that led to the wheelhouse, and up there were 6 or 7 higher-ups from the mining company, and none of them saw anyone but us climbing the stairs in a frantic fit, looking for him. Upon returning to the gallery, the guy who handed us inflation devices before boarding was still manning the dock, and he said no one had passed him. The captain of the tug was behind the controls the whole time, because he was required to keep the nose of the tug against the dock, and 3 other deckhands were all outside the doors, port and starboard, all of which provided a 360-degree view of the lower deck, and all said they did not see anyone leave after we medics entered the gallery. We returned to the gallery, and despite being weirded out, the other 2 casualties were treated and transferred off-site to the hospital. In the debrief, it was only myself, my partner, and one of the other 2 medics that verified that the older guy was in the room, as the other medic involved had no recollection, but thinks she just was too involved in her own case, and the tugboat crew reported stating 2 people pulled from the water, and that there was no 3rd casualty. I tried to talk to the casualties in the hospital afterwards to try and get some answers, and find out if they saw him, or if indeed the old mate was one of their fathers, but after 2 consecutive days, my shifts ended, and I had the day before beginning night shift to go to the hospital, and they'd both been discharged. My brother-in-law works at the hospital, and he says that nothing was untowards about them, except that one of the guy was all, "I'm so happy to be alive," while the other guy didn't do much else than sit silently, looking out the window and not eating anything. To this day I still have no idea what the hell happened, but, as is usual, only myself and mate medic speak about it occasionally when we're drunk, and that's all we can do. This was when I was working as a nurse at an Ebola clinic in Liberia. Most of the patients that had Ebola and died didn't hemorrhage much, a little vomiting and diarrhea, but nothing of hot zone level, except for one guy. It was myself, a Liberian sprayer, and a Liberian nurse. We suited up to take a man out the back of the Liberian ambulance, a pickup truck with a covered bed and a washable mattress. This guy was in his early 20s and was in poor condition. He crawled onto a stretcher we laid down for him. He was sweating profusely and his eyes were already blood red. The blood red of a man ready to die from Ebola. He didn't speak any English, just smattering off Capellean moans. He rolled on his side and vomited. A slow, gelatinous mass rolled out of his mouth, as dark as 1,000 moonless African nights. It left his body thick as an apple. It rolled out of his body and splattered against the canvas of the stretcher, covering my Tyvek suit from the knees down in dark blood. For those 2 seconds it was leaving his body, before it splattered on the stretcher, it was alive. It was Ebola incarnate. We washed the man off with 0.05% bleach solution and took him inside. We did an Ebola test, PCR, and pushed a litre of fluid and 1 litre of oral rehydration salts. This perked him right up. He sat up, asked for food, and ate a generous portion of fufu. We thought we had managed to turn things around and that he might make it, but he was dead in 2 hours. I still can't look at Jello today without thinking of him. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. We should probably try and lighten the mood after that horror show. I think that's been one of the darkest videos to date. It's just too much. Having a young daughter myself, I can't ever imagine having to go through something like that. So why don't we tell a joke? I think that's B. Buster's thing. I don't really know any jokes, so let's just pretend I told a really funny joke and made the situation really lighthearted. Yeah, let's just pretend I did that. Anyway, if you enjoyed the not joke and the video, don't forget to drop a like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and just how heartbroken you are after hearing those stories. If you liked it. If you're new here and haven't been completely put off, feel free to subscribe and press the bell icon for new and slightly less horrifying content tomorrow and every other day. Yeah. You can also send me your stories, that'd be pretty cool. I do read them out on the channel. Just make sure that you put in good spellings. Please paragraph your stories. That's like super important. What else? Yeah, lots of punctuation too, and description. That's always nice. I'm just trying to ramble so that we can forget about what we heard earlier. Maybe I shouldn't even have included it. Was that too terrible? Let me know down below if you thought, no, Mort, this is too much. We want horror stories, but we don't want horror stories. So please tell me, because if it's too much for some people, I don't think I'll do one like that again. But I did leave you a warning, so, I let you guys know. I've been rambling sufficiently now. If you want something light-hearted that will make you feel good, watch my brother's channel or my wife's channel. Just watch and, just keep watching videos. They'll make you feel good. Why not cat videos? I love cat videos. Anyway, I'm going to link some random stuff on the screen for you to contemplate watching for you to feel better. But with that being said, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, have sweet dreams, and I'll see you in the next one. And wear your seatbelt, people. And don't drive ridiculously fast. Please.